Today I want to look at a series that capitalized on players' desires to pick up a game for 5-minute stints, only to realize they'd been playing it for hours thanks to its simple premise, precise mechanics, and rewarding trial and error. This is a beloved series that has spanned the last decade, utilizing precise physics to fling projectiles and tear down fortified structures. Through a variety of missile options, you can bash, smash, and explode your way through those walls, enjoying the chaos as you witness the successes and failures of your attempted destruction. Revel in your victories and try again in defeat. The charming art style, addictive gameplay, and numerous sequels have made it a long-time staple to many. This is, of course, Crush the Castle. How's it going, guys? My name's Graham and welcome to Two Left Thumbs. This is Flashlight, the series where I talk all things Flash related. Sorry for the old switcheroo there, I just really couldn't help myself. Crush the Castle is of course the popular Armor Games classic that actually inspired Angry Birds. Even though its popularity has paled in comparison, I think it's important to talk about the game that led to the development of one of the most successful mobile games of all time. A game that now has a television show and multiple successful movies. Crush the Castle was insanely popular online, and it was directly copied with more cartoonish graphics, with a skin of pigs and birds instead of medieval knights and trebuchets, being launched on a different platform for a different market, reaching a height of popularity that no one thought was possible. Now I may sound bitter, but I don't want this to be a slam piece on Angry Birds.
So like Walt Disney said, they don't make movies to make money, they make movies to make more movies. So we make games to make more games, and we'd love to come out with the next Temple Run, or what's the game with the birds? I can't remember. Some of the birds
Slightly
flying through the air. Yeah.
Poultry.
Yeah, peep poultry.
Rovio didn't steal assets or do anything unethical here. There's a very thin line between ripoff and inspired by, and I would say the argument can be made in any direction for Angry Birds.
If it's a complete clone, then it would have been a trebuchet or something similar, but obviously it wasn't, which is a good thing.
And for the record, I think Angry Birds is a great game. I own Angry Birds, I play Angry Birds, and they did an amazing job on taking, a concept that we actually borrowed from someone and improving upon it. And I think there are actually clones that go beyond that.
This idea of inspired by can be handled much more maliciously. People often look at Angry Birds versus Crush the Castle because it's a very obvious example of two very popular games. Because they were both successful, we tend to ignore examples like Destroy the Castle, a game which took the concept, themes, and even the name directly from Crush the Castle. Now, this game didn't really find any success of its own, so it doesn't ever really get brought up. Almost certainly there are more examples like this. There's probably so many that it's not worth anyone's time to really get into it. So the conversation tends to narrow down into the ones that are potentially eating each other's profits. This is a much larger topic than the video I'm currently talking about, but many things are inspired by in a way that doesn't leave a bad taste in anyone's mouth. Guardians of the Galaxy is a space opera in the way that Star Wars is. Street Sharks was inspired by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The Clash were inspired by the Ramones. The point being that there is a fine line here, one that I'm not planning to draw in the sand today. In fact, I'd rather it be a part of the conversation, that there's room for artists to take a new, fresh interpretation of something, to put their own spin on it, to add their own flavor. Maybe you're just turning chocolate into mint chocolate rather than inventing an entirely new flavor, but the idea is that you took something that people liked and went your own direction with it. I believe with Angry Birds, it was simply a matter of appreciating a premise and seeing its potential beyond the Flash game medium. Crush the Castle itself was actually an updated interpretation of another similar game. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I think understanding the timeline of the series and what became of it is important. There's a cultural relevance there, and it's really interesting to know that this concept of Angry Birds didn't just come out of thin air. There were building blocks laid out before it that resulted in this end product. Joey Betts, the original creator of the series, spoke to this in an old Reddit AMA. When I first saw it, I thought, what a ripoff, especially when they had a Crush the Castle tag in the game. When it started growing in popularity, it became kind of flattering, really. There was a short window where the Flash game peak overlapped with a massive rise in the mobile gaming market. Developers were shuffling all over, deciding where they wanted to commit their efforts. Would your newest concept be a Flash game, PC, or mobile? Nowadays, developers are a little more fluid. They'll work in whatever medium works best for their latest concept. Many games are just ported to every accessible platform. Games you've never expected in a million years to play on mobile are suddenly on consoles, PC, and your phone. But back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, developers were likely to stick stick with what they already knew. A tried and true publisher was maybe starting to branch out into mobile games a little bit, but they were most likely to stick it out in the Flash world. Studios like Rovio are important because they came onto the scene knowing they wanted to make mobile games. Back in 2009, Armor Games, Joey Betts, and Con Artist were publishers and developers who had already had prolific careers as Flash developers. Flash was still strong and profitable, and the mobile gaming market wasn't the tried and true powerhouse it is now. Rovio was a new company coming into their own. They were experimenting and trying to see what worked, same as all the other developers in the mobile market. Almost everyone on the planet had a phone in their pocket.
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
You just needed a concept that worked well enough on enough different levels to appeal to a wide enough audience to get everyone to download it. Yeah, it's a pretty tall order. When you think about how daunting that task is, it's easy to understand why they didn't want to reinvent the wheel with their first game. I've seen rumors that they had already developed the designs for the Bird and Pig characters in early 2009 without having an idea or IP to attach them to. And as they were looking for inspiration for their game, it would make sense to look at the Flash market. Both mobile and Flash games primarily appeal to someone who only has a few minutes to kill. Joey has heard similar rumors as well. I've heard from a few sources that they had a game that wasn't fun, but then they played Crush the Castle and decided to change the game. If that's true, then it's awfully flattering that they chose my game to copy. Likely someone saw the success of Crush the Castle online and saw the potential for a mobile gaming hit. Again, I don't want to do a disservice to Angry Birds or the team behind it. They capitalized on the mobile potential, catered to a wider audience with cute characters and no blood splatter, forming a unique IP around the concept, framing levels with a limited set of projectiles rather than your full arsenal, and generally improving the flinging mechanics. Game developers, authors, directors, and artists of all kinds lift inspiration from each other, so I don't want to devalue the work that Rovio did. I hope that through looking at the history of Crush the Castle, we can better understand the game that has lived in the shadow of its successor for nearly 10 years. There's an interesting analysis of the two games in a publication by Herschel Desai, where he explains the difference between positive and negative reinforcers. For example, Crush the Castle follows the old school Flash format of mission success and mission failure, simply stating you've won or lost. Whereas Angry Birds will have great fanfare, with your characters dancing around and celebrating. Both of these are positive reinforcers. You have a sense of pride for winning either way, but obviously Angry Birds is milking that for just a little bit more, capitalizing further on that joy of success. But Herschel also describes the positive punishment in Crush the Castle. Part of winning is leaving behind a bloodied wake of corpses. This negative image is spun positively as a success. Now, many video game players are very desensitized to this sort of thing, and likely wouldn't bat an eye. But some people are a little squeamish around blood, and some parents might not want their kids experiencing those graphic images at a young age. So a positive punishment might only elicit that feeling of reward in select players. Herschel argues that this could have detracted from the mass appeal potential of Crush the Castle. So yes, Crush the Castle was absolutely a success in its own right, but there's that little nagging thought of what could have been. Now, I'll be sure to continue tying in Angry Birds and the ideas of inspiration and borrowing from one another, but for the remainder of the video, I'm going to shift the style more similar to how I do in most episodes of Flashlight. So I'll now be looking at each of the installments of Crush the Castle individually and chronologically. As I mentioned, this story doesn't actually start with Crush the Castle itself. Liam Baumer's Castle Clout in late 2008 was clunky, visually lackluster, and not particularly engaging. But there was obviously a kernel of a good concept there as recognized by Armor Games. Not that it was necessary, but Armor, being the great team that they are, actually got Baumer's permission to develop a game inspired by his work. I would say in this particular instance, asking for permission goes a bit deeper than simple common courtesy, seeing as both Castle Clout and Crush the Castle are completely thematically the same. It's even been confirmed by Joey Betts that Armor not only got permission, but literally paid Liam to use the concept. In an industry plagued with ripoffs, reskins, asset flips, and idea theft, it's something that's never taken into consideration and is almost always taken for granted. I just wanted to be sure to include that, as it's a real testament to what an upstanding and trustworthy team Armor Games truly is. All the more reason to continue supporting their work past, present, and future. I've always been a fan, but that's kind of amazing. Anyway, I'll get back on track. Joking about the way these games have built on one another by basically saying Crush the Castle is to Castle Clout what Angry Birds is to Crush the Castle. I bet an even greater game will come along and become the Angry Birds to Angry Birds as well. He capped all that off with a little winky emoji. Crush the Castle in April 2009 put together the powerhouse team of programmer Joey Betts and artist Con Artist. This game introduces all the basics, including pretty well everything you're familiar with in Angry Birds. The options your trebuchet can launch are a single rock, a larger rock, multiple rocks, bombs, so on. The game has cool and original level layouts, but it can be pretty easy. The solution is almost always the tool you were most recently given. There's not really any encouragement to venture outside of that. Maybe there's the odd exception, but the game is pretty straightforward. It was all about trial and error, repetition, and getting a feel for the mechanics. There's no way to pay for an automatic win, you just have to try again. Crush the Castle had a simple, entertaining idea which perfectly encapsulated what makes Flash games so enjoyable. You can easily consume the game for 5 minutes when you're bored, but the entire game can be completed in 30 minutes if you want. From there, you can continue to mess around and experiment with the levels in whatever way you want. The game is tight, rewarding, replayable, and mega fun, minus exploitative mobile marketing tactics. It was a runaway success, as should be very obvious by the fact people don't tend to replicate games that aren't. In Crush the Castle 2, you have much more tool variety, there's a lot more freedom to play around with things, but again, there's never really a decision to be made. A lot of levels only have one solution. You just got the timed bomb? Use that, cause literally nothing else is gonna work here. There's no real stakes, you just take as many attempts as you like. You're never gonna run out of a specific projectile type. Maybe you want to try and best yourself by using as little as possible, but if all you care about is getting to the end, you can grind your way through it pretty easily. But I like the way you can travel around the map, seeing the actual settings change. It kind of fleshes out the world and makes it feel a little more adventurous. There's cool elemental options. We get to see the chaos and destruction of fire bombs. I would have liked to see mechanics like that stretched further, as I think there was a lot of potential there. Some levels were designed with one solution in mind. In the same way that you sometimes feel like you only have one real option to complete a level, you'll encounter levels where the developers clearly only considered one solution to the level. In Broken Circuit, if you ignore the intended solution and just use a firebomb, it's much easier. The idea of having your full arsenal available to you at all times is pretty cool, because it gives you the freedom to do whatever, but it makes me start to understand the appeal of completely limiting what a player has. It's a concept I unwittingly adopted for Knock Knock Knockin'. When designing that game, I only ever really had one solution in mind. Maybe I provided an extra arrow or two in case you didn't get it right on your first shot, but I think a mistake in that game was that I was forcing people to think through solving these puzzles the way I wanted them to solve them. And that might have been a limitation in Crush the Castle 2 as well. I think it had to have been a tough place for them when they created this incredibly popular game, but now your sequel not only has to live up to and surpass the original, people also need it to be different than Angry Birds. If you retread too much of the same ground from your original game that inspired this new game, despite that big bold 2 at the end of your title, you still start to look like the ripoff. I can't imagine that was a comfortable situation for the developers, and I really do empathize with how difficult that must have been to develop. There was a few cool concepts on display here. The level thick walls had weather. Something like that would have been really cool to explore further. I don't feel like it was fully capitalized on. Mechanics like the acid were super fun to play around with, but watching it can take a painfully long time. And sometimes after watching all of that, it still ends in a loss. People in general aren't patient, gamers usually aren't very patient, and someone looking to kill only a couple of minutes online definitely isn't patient. So I would have liked to see things sped up a little bit. One incredible thing that this series did for both games, they allowed Crush the Castle 1 and 2 to be expanded upon through player packs. The team made the level editor used to make the actual levels in the game available for fans, allowing them to craft and submit their own. Thousands of entries were made, with the cream of the crop being hand-selected to release as their own games. One thing I really love here is that rather than simply being a list of new levels that people can poke around with, which would have been the simplest, easiest cash grab solution, was that the care was actually taken to build a unique narrative for these player packs. It allowed fans to see their creations in an actual game, playing a real role in the larger story of Crush the Castle, even if story was never the forefront of these games. And entirely from a developer's perspective, this is just a genius tactic. If you were to release a follow-up to your game that had zero improvements in mechanics or art, people are going to view that as phoning it in, maybe a bit of a cash grab. If you release the semi-sequel to your game that has no updates, but is specifically pulling from your fandom and your own community, people are going to be super forgiving of that. In fact, they're going to be very excited about it. In a market where games typically come and go very quickly, you've now vastly extended the amount of time people are talking about and sharing your game, and really filling in that gap before the proper sequel comes out. Seeing how well this was executed, and how obviously successful it was, I'm kind of surprised it's a strategy that didn't catch on. I've seen it played around with in small ways, but never quite like this, never with a story, balancing that feeling of being a tribute to your fans, and feeling like a proper new game. There's honestly a sincerity to that, and fans definitely picked up on it. It's like a free expansion pack. You as a developer are going to have to hand select the quality levels, as well as stitching them together narratively, but that's gotta be simpler than starting from scratch. I would love to see some statistics on this, but it just so obviously to me seems worth the time. What about taking a game to the next level? Going from a flash-in-the-pan time killer, pardon the pun, to something that will resonate with players and keep them coming back. When I released Crush the Castle back in 2008, we launched with an in-game editor. Players could make their own castles and share them with each other. That game and the games following it have had the most returning players out of any I've made. It was a small feature at the time, but it gave players a reason to come back. So in the span of a year, we had Crush the Castle 1, Angry Birds, and Crush the Castle 2. The original Crush the Castle was eventually made as a mobile game. They added new mechanics, new ways to upgrade your trebuchet, ranks to unlock. They did what they could to make it a new enjoyable experience, and I think they wisely stuck to their original art style and branding. People who were familiar with Crush the Castle were going to have it on their phone. If that was your preference, it was now available to you mobily. If you wanted the gritty feel of bloodying knights rather than squishing cute little piggies, then you had that option. I don't think this was a misstep in any way, I think it was a good idea. Angry Birds was just too huge. It's got to be almost impossible to get a foothold there. There seemed to be a mindset of wanting to hang on tight to the Flash game sensibilities, while trying to mix in maybe a few mobile elements. Fans of the Flash series came over and didn't like the new mobile additions. People who were unfamiliar with the original didn't like how Flash gamey it was. It got caught up somewhere in the middle and didn't seem to translate particularly well. Years later in 2013, they revisit the concept with Crush the Castle Adventures, a new take on the series. Armor and Joey Betts are still at the helm, but Con Artist was busy making The Last Stand Dead Zone, which I'm still very interested to talk to them and make a Last Stand video. But this left Joey looking for a new artist to pair up with. This led to a new partnership, bringing in Jimp to take on the artistic duties, who has one of the most charming, likable, colorful, and recognizable art styles you're likely to have ever seen in Flash games. The guy's also crazy productive. Probably do an episode on him someday. Like seriously, you've probably played dozens of this guy's games. Joey and Jimp had worked together previously, crafting another incredibly popular physics-based Flash series, Sushi Cat. He's just an awesome, super nice, super talented guy. He was a perfect match for the style we were going for. I know I put him through a lot for Crush the Castle Adventures, but I hope we can make many more games together. It's generally the same concept, only this time much more warm, friendly, colorful, and cartoonish. Yeah, they were taking a step in the Angry Birds direction. There's more of a story focus with little comedic beats that are playing out between levels. There's now a goal system where each level challenges you to complete a task like not crushing a chicken. Completing these tasks earns you ranks. It even borrowed the Angry Birds idea of having a predetermined amount of shots and types. They leaned into the cartooniness in a fun way. There's goofy new concepts like throwing beehives that affect units only. Something that normally would not serve a purpose when crushing a castle, suddenly now has a very particular role. Maybe there was a task where you only had to kill select units, so you wanted to avoid knocking down parts of the castle. They also played around with physics in more creative ways. Rather than simply being castle stand, castle fall, there's now pivots and mechanisms that you can bounce around on, pushing a panel to open a lever which then allows you to drop a bomb on someone. I know some people aren't going to like the departure from the gritty medieval setting, but there's some really good concepts on display here. It adds in lizard people and Vikings. You're traveling the lands, going on an adventure. It's not so generic this time around. There's funny events like sending a saboteur with TNT into the castle, trying to save a character from a tribe of cannibals, or tearing down a ship that's somehow stranded in the middle of land. There seems to have been some really good lessons learned along the way here. There's an excellent blend of concepts that work both in Flash and a mobile gaming market. But I think they chose to test the waters and stick with Flash only. Get a response to mechanics, feel out the fan reaction, and think about how to move forward with the series. Around the time of Adventures, Joey Betts addressed how it felt to attempt to carry forward the series and brand when the market was so clearly dominated by Angry Birds. It's kind of been a burden really. I want to make more Crush the Castle games, but I feel like they're flooding the market a bit, and now that they have a massive team with tons of developers, it gets harder and harder to make them relevant in the genre. Crush the Castle Adventures is the best I can do with a year and a half of development time and only a handful of developers. There was also even a Crush the Castle TD, which I'm not really going to talk about. In my Infectinator episode of Flashlight, I talked a lot about the potential behind an IP that can be flexible enough to apply to many genres. I think it was pretty quickly apparent that Crush the Castle at its heart is maybe too generic for that. So yeah, let's stick with the projectile-based gameplay. Now coming full circle, I think last year is where Armor Games took the most significant step with Crush the Castle as a series. They released a legitimate Angry Birds competitor with Crush the Castle Siege Master. This is a game that's building off of 10 years of lessons learned, including teaming up with Yuyava, a developer Armor has worked with frequently to port their most popular series to the mobile gaming platform. It's still trebuchets, it's still castles, the variety of projectiles is familiar, there's goals per level that carried over from Crush the Castle Adventures, but otherwise pretty much everything else is different. They've fully embraced the cartooniness. This is a very different game, one that was 100% made for the mobile world. So if you're a fan of the Flash game original, I understand that you might feel kind of boxed out here. But I think this is well enough made that it's worth at least giving a shot. At the start of each level, you witness the castles be quickly built in front of your eyes, and it looks incredible. Everything is in a 3D environment. Castles are no longer collapsing in on themselves in this 2D plane. Knocking a brick loose might actually create this domino effect of an entire round structure caving in around an enemy. The art, animation, and physics are all a dream. There's these cool progression levels where you have to fight through multiple castles. If you wasted too much ammo on the first level, you're not going to be able to complete the second. They even play around with having funny references. Not all the structures have to be castles. There's even a cute little story throughout, with small little levels that don't add much except for expanding that story. Do I think this has the mass appeal, the cuteness, and the uniqueness of an IP to have a multiple movie series like Angry Birds? Probably not. But it's an incredibly fun game that really exemplifies this funny idea of inspired by. Castle Clout leads to Crush the Castle. This paves the way for Angry Birds. This leaves Armor Games having to reconsider and experiment with something like Crush the Castle Adventures, eventually being inspired both by their own product as well as the one that supposedly stole their thunder, coming together in a very fun game like Siege Master. It's just wild to see the way it all came back together like that. I hope I was able to inform on the full story and maybe shed a bit of light on the age-old question of which came first, the chicken or the castle? I think that was adequately corny enough to end the episode on. Maybe the joke kind of falls apart anyways because they added chickens to Crush the Castle. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. This video first came out 2 years ago. I'm slowly working on updating and revising all these old Flashlight episodes. This series really means a lot to me, and I'm very excited that all these episodes are getting to exist in their best possible form. It's been fun to balance that with entirely new episodes. I have many more in mind. I don't really have anything else to plug today, so maybe you do me a favor and check out another episode of this series. I'm really happy with how the updated Soul Game Studio video came together. Maybe you start with that one. It kind of flew under the radar. Thank you, the patrons of the channel, for their continued support, and I hope to see you all again soon.